While we have much important material to get onto for this year, especially as we're talking about 2024, a year of elections where potential gun control issues are coming down the pipeline, where we see some of the perhaps even civil war lines being drawn, we have to take a moment to deal with some issues that are on the table. And there is a story going around right now about something that happened at SHOT Show this year, and I think it needs to be addressed because while there is an event that took place, what we are dealing with here might sometimes be referred to as ideological entryism, or ultimately what results in mob rule. Now, the Redacted Culture Cast is dedicated to a number of things involving both gun culture, the right to self defense, rigorous classic philosophy, and how we think about what is right and true and good. And this is an example, rare in its own right, that provides somewhat of a good groundwork for us to look at tactical strategy or tactics and strategies, geez, when it comes to beliefs, tribes, cultures, and communities. So what happened was is that there was a bar fight and somebody ended up with a broken jaw. And what is important to understand, and where I must start here, is that in this sense of what I'm referring to today as ideological capture, the event that took place, which we will refer to as the precipitating event, can very oftentimes be a legitimate or true thing. Now, there are many voices. There are a couple of them, actually, not many. There's a couple of voices, and maybe some of them are trolls or whatever it is, that's flying around the internet right now about Jussie Smollett or these kind of hoaxes and hate crimes and stuff like that. And I don't know if it is, I don't know how important it would be to give them any credence because, like I've said in recent history, you can't really hold people accountable if you don't know who they are. If you don't already have a relationship with them. So, how ideological capture can function in using a method that would might be described as entryism, but it's a little bit more. But it's instead of it just being entryism, it's a little bit more, what's the word, opportunistic than that. What ends up happening is an event takes place. There's a tragedy or some information is made known to the public. And as a result, it sweeps across the culture and it creates some form of a movement. And then that movement, then in its fervor for correcting the problem, so to speak, leaves a trail of bodies. And by the end of it, those who participated are left with the bill, wondering if it was worth it all along. Or worse, this is how communists get in your midst. Kind of weird. I know that the phrasing of that is a little difficult, or it's a little touchy, perhaps a little too on the nose for the subject at hand. But let's talk about the details. Not the details of what took place at SHOT Show, but rather what is happening about it now. You may have started to hear calls for us to need to do something about it, or that the community needs to rally together and come to Jesus or come to terms with something in its midst. And what we are seeing here are the groundwork, is the foundation being laid for your communist style, there's no even better way to say it, your informant, the informant class, or the ability for others to people to inform on one another. Every time there's a very public case of stolen valor, there are oftentimes a number of other people who have to deal with sort of the backlash of it. So, a person who has somehow built a reputation for themselves or a name, some semblance of fame on being a special operations guy or a cool guy of some sort, ends up getting found out to being not who he says he was. In a stolen valor case like this, very oftentimes there are other people who have to bear some of the brunt of it, because in a sort of wave of fervor that goes through the gun culture, now all anyone who's claimed to be something is under suspicion, with a few exemptions. But what ends up happening, and what is perhaps another example in our own life that we have seen, would be something more like Harvey Weinstein. So, what happened with the whole Harvey Weinstein event is that Harvey Weinstein, what the actions of a certain individual by the name of Harvey Weinstein were absolutely atrocious, evil by all accounts. And if is so far as what we understand about it to be true, man essentially raping people and forcing them to do things, is as long as we assume that to be true, and we rightly believe so, I think, I have no reason to doubt it. What we got was the Me Too movement. And the Me Too movement came out of this public sort of outing of this known predator. And now you got your movement, and everyone around was saying, "Me too, me too, me too." And that turned out to be true, right? It turned out to be true that Harvey Weinstein did something evil, but now any woman who did not, or any woman who had a hankering for ill-gotten gains, or had an encounter which she didn't enjoy enough, could claim that she was a fellow sufferer of Me Too. And in very, very quick fashion, the right people found their ways into fame and money, attacking the right people, claiming that they were in an illustrious relationship or something of that sort. And so the Me Too movement, which what turned out to be an absolute tragedy in the West, oftentimes costing people not only their careers, their marriages, their lives, but also ended up with major public events like, well, some things that have happened to Trump, but Brett Kavanaugh, and insert anybody here. If somebody wanted to assassinate somebody else's character in the court of public opinion, all they had to do was the present any claim of a Me Too scenario, and it produced the proper fervor that only left bodies in its wake. And so how that relates to what we're dealing with, the culture or the situation that we're dealing with right now as a gun culture, that I'm addressing right now as a gun culture, is that the reality of the event, the thing that took place, is very much so, it by all accounts looks like a very real event, and something that is simply stated, somebody did something that they shouldn't have done, and it was immoral, and for by all accounts it looks like it's legitimate. But I'm not sitting here to be a detective and a super sleuth, and it's not really worth our time, in the sense of, it's well, is it not worth our time? Yes, it's not worth our time to take what we refer to as gun culture and derail it into a movement. There is no movement within gun culture where we need to come to terms with the hidden elements of potential white supremacy that are in our rank. No, that is not going to produce the outcome that you want, because the people who exist within gun culture, who are, let's just say, harboring these white supremacists, whether it's in their companies or their friendships or their circles, are probably not going to just choose to out the people that they care about. They're not, or maybe the people that they've been protecting this long. I really doubt anyone's going to say, "Oh yeah, I admit I've been the friend of a white supremacist," because that would be reputational suicide. But rather, what's going to happen now is we're going to have a new version of the royalist, or the kulak, or the defector, or what, pick a term from history. So I'm going to go back to more ancient, or not ancient history, but let's go to what happened during the French Revolution. What is referred to as the Reign of Terror in the French Revolution it earns its name because all that a person needed to do to settle a grievance was to accuse the other of being a royalist. No court, no jury, no jury of your peers, no due process, just accusation, off with their head. And while what may have started the French Revolution began with what looks like, by many historical accounts, as being a legitimate grievance of the people, as well as the development of a more, let's call it somewhat egalitarian, but not between the sexes, more like egalitarian worldview that was dominant, that the purpose of government is to be for, by, and of the people. What ended up coming out of the reign of terror was that anyone could then just be accused of being a royalist. When we were in Afghanistan, it was not uncommon for someone to it was not uncommon for someone, an Afghani, who had a gripe or a grievance with another Afghani, to go to the Americans and say that the person who he had a grievance with was secretly working with the Taliban. Now, most of us learned pretty quickly that that was a tactic that uh, people in Afghanistan would use to settle their grievances, but it continues to show the thing that is threatening our community. So, in gun culture, no matter how broad or loose you paint that, what we're looking at right now and what we have to deal with is that there is a very real event that took place that, in all intents and purposes, is a bar fight at SHOT Show that looks like the perpetrator did something wrong. What that doesn't mean, and I want to make sure gets put to death immediately, is that everyone who considers themselves a part of gun culture needs to go on a soul searching path to try to figure out the hidden white supremacy in our ranks. Because, like I said, it's not going to happen. You're just going to get a new royalist claim that people get to throw at each other, causing further division in a time where we need to work together, come together, and volunteer to lead this community. You don't get to start a movement because of a bar fight. Now, we can still look at the events that take place, those who own businesses, those who engage in culture, those of us who, and when we're paying attention to what our friend circles look like, and say, ah, that shouldn't have happened. How can we prevent it? What it doesn't mean is that we get to create our own gun culture, Me Too, white supremacy hunt, or hunt, showdown, not showdown, witch hunt. I guess you could say witch hunt, where we now have this French Revolution-esque style accusation to throw at anybody we don't like. And that the the last example that I'm going to use, and the reason and why how we're going to talk about this in mob mentality, and uh pardon me, late the apparently the SHOT Show crud this year had a delayed fuse because everybody got it like 4 days after they went home. But what that means is, and what I'm referring to within gun culture specifically, is what took place in Minneapolis during the Summer of Love and the George Floyd riots. So, so I was living in Minneapolis at the time that it happened, and it was somewhat a politically divisive era because Donald Trump was president, and there was all this never-ending fear and complaint and twittering and whatever. But the Black Lives Matter organization, which started in Ferguson, where I was in Afghanistan at the time, the Black Lives Matter movement received its not Hail Mary, it received its like great event, and that was the death of George Floyd. And everybody in the city and everybody that I knew or I witnessed, whew, sneeze. I'm not at the scream sneeze phase because I'm not a father yet. Don't read into that too far. So what happened in Minneapolis was everybody saw the footage. It was everywhere, and it didn't look good. And so everyone that I knew, it was the dominant conversation very quickly. There was this look of, ooh, that not only does that not look good, but we might need to have a conversation with this. And you saw people sort of coming to the table or coming together to have a conversation about what happened, with the kinds of people who turned that movement into an opportunity to burn the city down and turn what was once the Mill City into a crime ridden war zone. So now, Minneapolis, which still has burned out sections of the city to this day, what started that was you had a precipitating event, something that happens that might actually be a legitimate case, but it is an event that happened. And in order for there to be a thing, an action done, there must be someone doing the action. And so the world saw through one perspective at least what kind of happened, and we all got together to talk about it, and this movement was started, and the result was catastrophic for everybody involved. I guarantee you the neighborhood where George Floyd died in is not better off than it was before, despite a couple of specific people making a couple of $1 million. uh and so the movement mentality, the mob mentality, is what captured the culture at the time. And as the threat of violence continued to roll through these riots and whatever, what we eventually started seeing, which was perhaps the most terrifying, is that there were tools that were used to identify targets by accusation. Most notably, if you remember what happened with Yelp reviews, is that Yelp was, I think it was Yelp, and I might be mistaken, but there was one of those kind of online review, not generator, but like, 4 stars for whatever kind of online crowdsourced reviewing process that was used. It was identifying certain companies as being like not like pro or not anti black friendly or whatever that meant at the time. At the time when people were going around burning buildings to the ground that they either accused of being white supremacist or something similar, you now had a reporting system where someone could anonymously accuse another business of being run by a opposite someone who opposes the movement that was Black Lives Matter. Perhaps you might call them a counter revolutionary. And so, in that sense, the precipitating event, the death of George Floyd, led to a mob movement that that produced fire, death, destruction, crime, and ideological capture of a population, the subjugation of Minneapolis, the fall of Minneapolis. And in the case that we are dealing with now as gun culture, is that we can learn from the past. We must learn from the past. And that is what we see here is something happened that shouldn't have happened. And there are people involved, and those people involved will have to deal with the consequences. And gun culture can come behind and support somebody who, by all accounts, appears to be the victim. Reputation beside that. And in the gun culture, which is entirely driven by reputation, almost entirely driven by reputation, we have a situation where individuals who have reputations for being certain ways have now gotten into what might be referred to as an altercation, and it looks bad. It's very easy to say, I think it's very reasonable to say that the person who perpetrated the attack did the wrong thing, and it doesn't need to be dragged through the streets and made everybody else's problem. What happened is not gun culture's problem, it's what those people did. And if we're going to turn this into a movement where we go door to door trying to figure out who in our ranks are secret white supremacists, congratulations. You're being psyoped by the feds into turning into a splintered, isolated, easily conquered people. That's probably the most aggressive way of putting it, but I maintain my position that this is not going to become a movement. This should not become a movement. We are not going to have the gun culture's version of Me Too, but with white supremacy instead. That is how an ideology enters into your community and takes control of it for itself. We don't It's not a movement. We don't need it to be a movement. It gets to stay over there and be handled with and dealt with by the people who it is germane to. It's probably it's the best way that I'm going to leave it as at that. And what happens in this mob mentality that opens up a way for ideological capture through a form of entryism is that you have a precipitating event, everyone gets on board behind it, and then some people take that grievance and they push it to turn it into a witch hunt for anybody who is accused of being the thing. And then as a result, fracture, divide, easily conquered. Let me be very clear. The event can be legitimate, the grievance can be legitimate, but the idea that you're going to create a movement that the sole thing that it's going to achieve is breaking apart and destroying what semblance of unity you might have in a population, or might work as another avenue of approach for someone to culturally divide a population, then you are the fool being led to the slaughter. Then we are the fools. If we are going to allow this to be indicative of the rest of the culture, then we are the fools being led to the slaughter, and it's only a matter of time. How then do we deal with it? People do evil things. Individuals do evil things. You're not going to turn it, we don't turn it into systems. We don't turn it into influences or a cultural problem. Wrong. When a person does a crime, that person is treated as doing the crime. It is not a hate crime, it is a crime. It is not, oh, well, that person has symbologies of hate in his mentality. No. When a person does something evil, he is addressed for doing something evil. When a person does something that is criminal, he is addressed for doing something criminal. And like we were talking about earlier, you cannot hold people accountable that you don't have a relationship with. Now, of the people who are, as far as I understand, reported to be involved in this incident, I don't really know either of them. I don't have a relationship with them. And so, would it be appropriate for me to hold them accountable? Not really, not likely. And that's why, with what's going on over there, I want to address what happens here in culture, here in our community, and here in the like in the greater conversation. If we want to be easily led by cheap rhetoric, we will look at every grievance as a legitimate cause for a revolution instead of saying that is wrong, it needs to be corrected. Grievances need to be corrected. That's well, legitimate grievances, perhaps, is the better way of saying it, lest somebody says, well, I'm aggrieved, so I can do what I want. But legitimate grievances ought to be corrected. And so, in closing, and why I thought it was important to address this subject is because we came home from SHOT Show. Uh, we came, the country has those everyone who went to SHOT Show has come home from SHOT Show, and this year was by far one of the best years that SHOT Show had in regards to culture. There was so much less of the dick measuring. There was so much less of the ego and the entourages and the celebrity chasing. In fact, the only two entourages that we saw that I can recall are not Grantham. That guy's cool. Sorry. Are the Liver King. Do not mistake Grantham with the Liver King. That was tragic. The Liver King and Terran Tactical, and those were the only two entourages I either encountered or was made aware of at SHOT Show this year, which is a stark difference to where we've been in the past. The celebrity obsession of what we are referring to as gun culture seems to be fading, and this is a good thing. This sort of pecking order, figuring out, fighting over back and forth seems to be a little bit of the thing of the past, which is a very, very good thing for us. There also seems to be a little bit less of a sense of obsession with being identified with material goods. But we all grow up, people at different levels of maturity. However, what we're witnessing here and why I am addressing this, why we have to nip this in the bud, whatever, nip this in the, yeah, bud, is because there is good that is happening in this community, and that's not it. And that is going to catch our attention and force us off the good path, because we're going to waste our time, effort, energy, and emotions spinning back and forth over another mob mentality, another mob hunt for the whatever the current thing is, and we will find ourselves on the rocks of a broken and ruined culture. We will sink our culture on the rocks of ideological capture. That's probably a better way of saying it. So watch out, take care, keep the faith, look out. Of course, as we're making, as if you believe that you need to hold somebody accountable, I think there are very few exceptions. But the thing about holding people accountable is that when you hold somebody accountable, you care about them. There is a sense of love or relationship. And if you don't have that relationship, or you don't intend on that relationship, you don't intend. So if I'm going to hold somebody accountable, the difference between an informant and somebody holding somebody accountable is that the informant wants ill-gotten gains, and the person holding somebody accountable desires a better life for the person accused. Do you, if we're going to create this witch hunt movement where we go about looking for all the white supremacy and gun culture, which, I mean, goodness gracious, we'll talk about being led by the people who hate you. Uh, I don't what the thing that the things that are being said, especially in different conversations, are, well, people outside the gun culture think we're a bunch of white supremacist racists. Like, dude, I don't care what you say in that sense. Like, you're not here. You're not a part of the community. You're not somebody who's making accusations against gun culture being a bunch of white supremacist neo-Nazis. Either doesn't know what they're talking about, which is very likely the case, or they're maliciously accusing others for the sake of their destruction. And so we're going to reject both things. We're going to move on. And as the Redacted Culture Cast carries on, we are going to continue to focus on the important things, what we think to be right and true and good. And one of those conversations coming up is, what does Christianity look like in gun culture in 2024? So, as we've seen all of these things unfold, I want to leave you with this. Just because an event takes place that looks bad, in this case, by all accounts, seems to be a very bad thing, does not mean we need to make a movement where everybody goes on a witch hunt for their own personal white supremacist. That being the case, thank you for listening. If you want to support us, you can head over to redactedculture.locals.com, or you can check out our website at redactedllc.com. And on the website, we do have a store, but you can also sign up for the dead drop, because that's going to be an early announcement. And if you're on Locals, don't forget to take advantage of that monthly discount I put out in the beginning of every month. That being the case, go forth and conquer.